We're speaking with Bryant Priester from Purdue University about how Purdue evaluates applications for admission. Bryant's just given us a great overview of the evaluation process, but now we'd like to speak with you about each piece of the application and how Purdue looks at those pieces. Okay. So for the quantitative parts of the application, I'll name a piece and you tell me what Purdue looks at and what Purdue looks for when reviewing that piece. Okay, so let's start with transcripts or academic documents.
Okay. Well, Purdue requires an original or an attested copy of the transcripts. And for students, they will have to submit a transcript for every school attended in high school, for example, because many students move back and forth from many schools. So we want to have all of the transcripts of the individual high schools that they received. We also prefer to receive either students who've done the GCSE, the IGCSE, or A-level or advanced subsidiary level. We want those original certificates as well, just not sort of them transposed on the transcript. So we want all those official documents. For students in India, we actually want, you know, the 10th board results examination. So we want all the internal marks, everything that a student has done to sort of prove what they've done in high school. Based on all of that information that a student has sent, depending on the country that they're from, what we look for at Purdue is we look at we need to make sure that students have done complete subject matter requirements. For example, at Purdue we require 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 3 years of science, 1 year of chemistry of a student studying engineering, and 3 years of social studies. We want to make sure students have done that before they've graduated from high school.
So Bryant, for the quantitative pieces of an application, I'll name a piece, and if you could tell me what you look for and what you look at when evaluating that piece.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's start with transcripts and academic documents.
Okay. Well, students can submit, you know, transcripts and academic documents through Common Application, but if they submit them through us through other means, we require an original or attested copy submitted to Purdue. At Purdue, students will need to submit these documents for every school attended in high school, because some students may attend multiple schools, so we would want the original transcript from all of the schools attended. In addition to students who have done either the GCE or IGCSE, some students may have done A-levels or the advanced subsidiary levels. We would want those certificates as well, documenting, you know, the scores that they've received. Students, you know, for specific national exams, perhaps India or Malaysia, we would want those final certificates of what they've done in those examinations for Purdue as well. And the reason we ask for all of these materials is because at Purdue, we want to make sure that students have met the basic subject matter requirements for admission. For example, right before a student graduates from high school, they would have to demonstrate 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 3 years of science. 1 year must be chemistry for students applying directly to the College of Engineering, and 3 years of social studies. And we will use all of those materials in order to make that determination. So sometimes, most students would generally send us everything and we don't have to ask, but sometimes we have to ask for these things because we can't determine that based on, you know, gaps, or they may not say that they've done, you know, the IGCSE, but there's no certificate that's with their documents. So that's why it's always important for students to make sure that they're aware of their admission status at time. So
when you're looking at an academic document, what is it that you look for? Are you looking for certain classes, obviously certain classes, but certain grades, certain trends, certain you know, strength of the classwork, the coursework that they're taking? We
want to make sure that our students, you know, have done well consistently, or if there's at least an upward mobility in terms of grades. It's fair to say most of our students do very well the first 2 years of high school. That's really not an issue, you know, 90% of the time. But how well they do from 11th grade onwards really that can be problematic, because that's usually when, you know, students, you know, start IB, or they may start with A-level, and so, or, you know, students, you know, may move on to other curriculum within their national curriculum. So when there's sort of a drop between what we consider the third year or the junior year of high school, that's become more of a concern, I think, with some of our students. So sort of putting all of that into context, I think is important. I think it's also fair to say for our students, specifically who apply to Purdue, there is no one educational system that's advantageous over the other. Some students think, I must do, you know, the British system, or I must do the International Baccalaureate. We do not have a preference at Purdue. Our only preference is you do well in whatever course of studies that's available or you decide to participate in at your particular high school. Because many of our students, they just do their national curriculum, and that is completely okay with us in West Lafayette at Purdue. I would say that, you know, generally our students, we get very talented students, and our students, you know, have, you know, especially for, you know, many of our courses, a B average and above. I think that's fair to say. The better a student does, obviously, the more likely they are, you know, prepared for admission.
Let's move to the testing side of things. So SAT or ACT, what is it that Purdue is looking for?
We do not require the SAT or ACT test for admission at Purdue. The way it will work for this fall in terms of our proficiency requirements, students can take any test for admission, IELTS, TOEFL. We will consider that if students get an A or B on English, A or B on the IGCSE, GCSE, we will give them English. That counts as English proficiency. Students can use the SAT or ACT test to demonstrate English proficiency if they choose to, but it's not a requirement for English proficiency. And the reason we decided upon that is because many students want to just take those two tests, and that's fine. But if you do decide to take the SAT or ACT test, the scores, students will have to achieve a fairly high score in which we consider sort of the average of all freshmen who are coming to Purdue. But if they can't, then they should consider taking the TOEFL, the IELTS, or another examination that's specifically designed for the English proficiency requirement. However, students who do submit the SAT or ACT test for admission, and when I say students, I'm referring to our foreign citizens or non-U.S. permanent residents, they will be given priority in the application process because we believe that, you know, students who are taking the SAT or ACT test, you know, they're going beyond and just taking one English proficiency examination. However, no student will be disadvantaged if they decide not to do it, but we will give priority for those who do.
And you already mentioned TOEFL and IELTS just now, and also earlier in the interview. And you talked about how strict Purdue is with the TOEFL and IELTS requirements. So what is it that Purdue is looking for when it comes to TOEFL or IELTS?
You mean in terms of the specific score?
Sure.
Well, for students who are applying to the College of Engineering, the College of Science, and the Crandon School of Management, they would have to score a minimum of 88. For students who are applying for all of our other majors and programs, including exploratory studies, which students will not select a major, they would have to score 79. All of our TOEFL scores, regardless of whatever score that you get, students will have to meet minimum sub-score requirements as well. For IELTS, students will have to score a 6.5 overall, but we have a minimum sectional score of 6.0. And as I mentioned before, the reason we're doing this at Purdue in terms of English proficiency is we do not have a English as a second language program for our students who come as a freshman. Students will receive English support in terms of classes, but not in the specific sort of ESL sort of coursework. So students have to be prepared when they come to Purdue. You know, I tell students this is not a punishment to you. This is designed so that you are ultimately successful, because I would not want to recruit a student to come to Purdue who's not able to communicate, who is not able to fully interact with the community in general over their course of study.
Bryant, you mentioned that Purdue is part of the Common Application, and the Common Application requires an essay.
Yes.
In your opinion, what makes a good essay?
Over my course of study, I always tell, students, parents, etc., what makes a good essay is an essay that really pinpoints a student's personal experience. And I'm going to give this example that I borrowed from one of my other colleagues. If you're in a class, if you were as a student in a classroom, and you dropped your essay without your name on it on the floor, would one of your classmates be able to pick that essay up and give it back to you? And if they're able to do that, in my opinion, that's an essay that's uniquely to you, that's based on your own personal interests and skills or whatever it is. That, in my opinion, makes a good essay. I think students have to be careful about, many students, they sort of fail to, when writing an essay, sort of explain the overall goals of an essay. It's one thing to sort of regurgitate your skills and interests, but it's another thing to be able to take all that knowledge that you've learned or gained and being able to apply it to your interests, what you want to study in life, or what sort of meaning you've gotten behind it. And sometimes students forget to take that extra leap when creating that essay. Those who do have the more successful essays, categorically.
As part of the Common Application, Purdue also requires a supplemental piece of writing. And the question that you pose is, what life goals will Purdue help you achieve and how? And it's limited to only 100 words.
Right.
So what is it that you're hoping to learn from this question, and why so few words?
Well, brevity is a skill too,
Absolutely.
and some of our students can go on and on and on. And this is not necessarily meant to be another essay. This is meant to, very succinctly discern, why are you interested in our institution? What can you gain from our institution based on what you know? Obviously, many of our students are very far away. They don't know everything there is to know about Purdue, West Lafayette, our skills and programs. But this is a way to sort of, for us, as counselors, as we're looking through things, and that this becomes increasingly important in many aspects of the application, to sort of figure out, well, who really has sort of done their homework, and I anticipate, as for various reasons, our application might grow, because being on a common application, it's easier to apply to Purdue. And also for us as counselors, with that growth, and not necessarily having a larger class in the future. I mean, we do not anticipate having a class of 2,000 international students. Not because we don't want 2,000 international students, it's because we don't have the facility and services to manage 2,000 international freshmen per year. As counselors, that is going to become a little bit more important as we really have to determine who really wants to study engineering, or who really wants to study liberal arts, and not sort of using that to study engineering or other programs at Purdue. So that's the way I see this sort of coming into play as we sort of move forward.
So at Purdue, how important are these pieces of writing in the evaluation process?
The pieces of writing are important in terms of they give us an accurate view of a student's motivation. And I would say, honestly, our international students are very honest about their intentions. And, there are times, a student will, write an essay, and, we will contact them and say, well, maybe you should look at this major or program. This is not what you should be applying for. So we use that as a way to communicate with our students and to help them figure out what they want to do. For those, we also use it as a way to, to understand who sort of knows about Purdue, and who's, who can sort of, put into writing how well that they, I guess, understand their desire to attend the university. And lastly, I would say that, the writing, gives us a chance to see, how well a student is able to communicate in general, especially where English is not the first language for our students. So,
now to move on to a different piece, Purdue does not require letters of recommendation.
We do. We now require at least a letter of recommendation via the Common App or the counselor form. So one or the other is a required component of the application.
Okay, great. So with a letter of recommendation, what makes a good letter of recommendation?
The most basic components, someone who has taught you recently. I mean, it does not make sense to have your kindergarten teacher write a letter of recommendation, and that's from previous experience. Someone who can, I honestly say someone within the core majors, science, math, English, who can really sort of speak about your abilities in your classroom. And I think that for those who, everyone is not a straight A student, and sometimes having a great letter of recommendation that can sort of supplement, maybe scores or grades is also very helpful, and it gives us a little bit extra insight as well. I think the letter of recommendation should specifically pinpoint how well the person knows the student, and how well you can sort of judge how the capacity of a student to do well in college. Because I read many letters of recommendations, and the ones I read, they would say the student is very nice, or the student has done well in the class. That does nothing for me as a professional. I want to know specifically what has the student done to you to make you think that they're nice. Have they shown up to class every day on time? Do they do their homework? Do they do well on their homework? Why do you think, that they will be able to succeed in college? What indicators, specific indicators that you have judged as being a teacher, being taught them, that you think will be important? These are the things that we want. The more detail a teacher or a recommender or a counselor can give, the better it will be for a student's, application. And some students, they don't take it as seriously. Or, even at Purdue, even though we have, a large application pool, it still could be important depending on many different factors that we sort of just mentioned in the application process.
So again, as part of the Common Application, students are going to be prompted to submit school forms through the application. How do you use the school forms during the review process?
We don't use the profile as heavily in general. And honestly, I mean, many of the students who are applying, they're generally they're very good students, and we feel like they're either at the top of their class, I don't think it bears that much relevance in terms of us looking at the student's grade profile. So, especially when you have so many applications, and there are certain profiles. If a student is taking, let's say, AP something, and of the 3 people who took it, all 3 got C's. That those things are helpful, but in terms of I don't think that will have like an overall. We're not going to look at that particular profile, in comparison to all the other students, and in order as we make a decision.
You've mentioned a couple times a school counselor, right? For many students who are attending national schools in their home countries, they might not have someone who has the title of school counselor, or someone to direct these forms to or get the letter from. Do you have any advice for students who don't have a quote-unquote school counselor?
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we don't require the counselor form. It's either teacher or counselor, so students can submit one or the other. It's up to make their decision. I tell students, that's a reason. If you have questions, talk to me or talk to our office. We talk to students a lot about, the application process or being counseled. Even though we have many applications, many people are surprised that, we pick up our own phones or we answer email. So I tell students, that's my job to do that, and it's not a bother. That's what I'm being paid to do. That's why I travel to talk to people. And you might be surprised. I might be in a city near you. You know, it depends on when you send me an inquiry. So that's what I want students to know about that. You know, don't be intimidated by the process. You know, my job is to help you through the application process. You know, and hopefully, you know, it works out that you are successful at Purdue if that's where, you know, you determined, you know, after looking at everything that's where you want to, you know, spend 4 years. So
we get a lot of questions about activities and extracurriculars. So do your expectations for activities, outside interests, extracurricular involvement, do those expectations differ for international students than for domestic students?
I don't think they differ. I think that there's a myth or there's this sort of expectation you need to do something. And it sort of multiplied as students sort of thinking about applying to U.S. universities. In general, we've never denied a student, at least I haven't, if a student has done nothing. But, you know, it's really not about what you do. It's about how you sort of put it all together in the grand scheme of things. Because our students who do participate in activities, you know, they're able to put it in their essay or purpose statement that sort of gives, you know, another dimension or insight about who they are as a student and why they're interested in their own particular goals. Students who do nothing, in general, can't do that. And that sort of makes them uncompetitive for admission on other levels rather than just not doing a specific activities. So you got to sort of look at it in the whole grand scheme of, you know, why are you doing this? You know, I don't want a student to do an activity because they feel obligated to do it. Because, I mean, it comes across in your application. You know, you put down 20 things and, you know, you can't even remember if you did them all or when you did them or how you did them. That's not what we want. You know, if you do one thing well or one thing that adds passion and, you know, dimension in your life, that's great. And being able to talk about it, you know, beyond of, you know, oh, I was president, you know, and I told these people what to do. Not talking along on those lines, but talking along the lines of being a part of this club for these past few years has given me this much insight in my life. It is, you know, it is without a doubt demonstrated that I should be a part of this career path. That's what we want to see in any college or university as we're reviewing applications. So that's how I sort of frame things when I talk to students.
You brought up a term earlier in the interview, demonstrated interest. Does Purdue consider demonstrated interest as part of the evaluation process, and why or why not?
We don't do as much for our international students in terms of demonstrated interest because we have a very large and competitive application pool. So so that's not sort of calculated into the evaluation process. Other universities do, you know, but we don't use that in terms of determining whether or not a student is admissible or not. Because as I mentioned, our student comes from a wide variety of different situations, and many students may not have access to, you know, internet or email or whatever it is, you know, that could sort of be calculated in terms of demonstrated interest.
We're going to take another quick break, and we'll be back shortly to finish up our conversation with Bryant.